Daniel chapter 9, part 3. Here's something we didn't discuss in the last video, and that was the 70th week. 70 is 7 times 10. 7 for perfection, 10 for completion. We discussed the 7 weeks and the 62 weeks that were prophesied to Daniel that it would take for the Jerusalem city to be rebuilt and its walls. And that end date ended around the time that Jesus turned 30. Jesus' baptism aligned with the start of John the Baptist's ministry, which began in around the years 28-29 AD. And then we see in this verse that after the 69 weeks are complete, Messiah would be cut off. Cutting off meaning a violent death. And that date is most likely at 33 AD. So was that 70th week the time of Jesus, his ministry, his being cut off, the time of fulfillment of all things? No. God chose to hold that 70th week in his hand and wait. But what he did allow was a type of prototype of the 70th week. So that Jesus' ministry, that was 3.5 years long, would have been the first half of a week of 7 years. Let's look at this timeline. So he was baptized there at the start of the timeline, and then halfway through a 7-year period, Messiah was cut off. His ministry ran for about 3.5 years, as far as we can tell, a half a week. And then from his death came his resurrection and his ascension, much like Joseph, who went from the pit to the palace, if you remember in Genesis. Then Pentecost happened with the baptism of the Holy Spirit, but then the rest of that timeline doesn't add up because there is no abomination of desolation that happens during that time period. So that's why Jesus' timeline could not have been the full 70th week. But I believe that God is showing me that he used it as a prototype for the real 70th week, which was to come. God did not plan for the end of times to occur yet, because Messiah had to be rejected by his brethren, just like Joseph was. And the Gentiles had to come in. So God held onto that 70th week in his hand, on hold, waiting for the redemption of all things and to bring an end to this story. Remember, Joseph was resurrected from a prison cell and ascended into the palace, but he was not redeemed with his brethren until much later time. Now let's look at the final 70th week timeline, the time called tribulation, where for the first 3.5 years, perhaps exactly 2,000 years later, the imposter, the Antichrist, will become the beast to exalt himself. Now let's superimpose these two timelines. There will be similarities during this first 3.5 years because God's people will be doing things like the two witnesses that reflect the ministry of Jesus, doing the things that he did and greater things. And of course, we will see the sharp differences between Jesus and the Antichrist. Jesus' ministry was striving against the darkness, while this time is a time of participating with darkness. Jesus spent the first half of the week building a discipleship kingdom based on servanthood, self-sacrifice, godliness, and love, while the Antichrist is building an oppressive kingdom based on slavery, selfishness, filth, and hate. Jesus was rejected, the Antichrist is accepted. At the halfway point, Jesus, full of humility, is crucified, while the Antichrist, full of arrogance, is standing in the temple as God. People can choose to become bondslaves to Jesus or accept the slavery of the Antichrist by bowing to him and taking his mark. The true Prince of Peace left us with his peace, while the counterfeit Prince of Peace breaks the peace treaty. The building of God's kingdom continued as his followers were empowered to evangelize and share the gospel. And the followers of the Antichrist build Satan's kingdom by drinking the blood of the saints, immorality, and idolatry. So this church age has remained in this little timeline, this little prototype timeline until the end. And now the end of the timeline includes Jesus coming back on the clouds of heaven and the Antichrist going into the lake of fire. So be encouraged because the full 70th week, the true one, will start at tribulation, where the true Prince of Peace finally reigns supreme. And all evil fakers who say peace, peace, but there is no peace, they will meet their demise. And all things will finally be set right, on earth and in heaven. In Jesus' time, The hypocrites were exposed. It brought the darkness to light. And that is what is happening now as the transgressors are coming to the full and that fierce king is rising up. God planned the terrible cutting off of the Messiah, his son, Jesus. But he also planned the later redemption, as it was with Joseph. For Joseph, it took several years for his redemption to come to pass. For us, it is taking 2 millennials, but it will be worth it. Worth waiting for. God bless you all.